So first off, how about a little background? What drove you into this whole Mars thing?
Well, like everybody else that was interested in Mars back in the 70s, I remember NASA sending up the two twin Viking landers that went up there, and they had the orbiters going around, and the two Viking landers that landed in the Utopia area of Mars. And it was an exciting time, and that's back in 1976, that summer when they sent back some images, which was the country was going through its bicentennial. I don't know if any of the listeners remember out there, if they were around in the 1970s, the country was celebrating its bicentennial, and the Viking was actually going to land on Mars, celebrating our 200-year anniversary of the country. So it was an exciting time, and not only did we land on Mars, they sent back pictures that showed what appeared to be a face on Mars. And I remember the press conference they had on television stating that they had found a structure or a formation that looked like a face. And then it was a couple days later they had another press conference. Didn't get a lot of attention, that they had taken pictures, a couple hours early, a couple hours later, and it showed it to be nothing but a pile of rocks, and there was really nothing there. It was just a trick of light and shadow, and it was all forgotten. But a lot of people still speculated that this was possibly a structure. So that's how I originally got interested and intrigued with the possibility of structures being on the surface of Mars.
Incredible. Now, what say you on that face? I've seen both sides of the fence who say no, it just looks like one, and others who say no, absolutely not. There's been many pictures taken. It is a face, and even pyramids that are supposed to be around it.
Right. Well, the face on Mars is probably the most photographed feature on the planet. NASA's probably taken close to 30 images that include the face on Mars. So, even though originally they said they had no interest in this feature, it was, anything that they were looking at had to be scientific features that they were looking at, geological features. But, when all's said and done, they've taken, like I said, close to 30 pictures of this. So it's something that they've been interested in, in their own right. So we do have a lot of pictures, and what the pictures do show is what NASA tries to project to the public is that, the more pictures they take, it proves that this is nothing but just a pile of rocks and there's nothing really there. But it's to the contrary. Actually, the more pictures they have taken actually confirms the facial features, the eye, the nose, the split bifurcated aspect of the face showing the humanoid on one side, a feline on the other. Actually, most of the newer images all are taken of the feline side, that type of angle coming in from the eastern side, getting the feline side of the face. There's just overwhelming evidence that this is a structure that has artwork on it that looks like a bifurcated face with a humanoid on one side and a feline on the other. So it's very interesting that they have all this supportive information, and the media and basically NASA would just hope that people would forget about this. But that's not the only face on Mars. There's facial geoglyphs in different areas of the planet, along with figurative things and animals and all kinds of geoglyphic features on the surface of Mars.
Yeah, I've seen so much, and I don't take everything that people put on the internet, as so I take it from people who I trust, like yourself and others, and that's the stuff I most interest myself in, and even that, I've seen so much. I mean, I've seen these. It looks like art that has been designed to be seen from the air. I mean, that's what it looks like. Some of this stuff.
Exactly, and there's a lot of things that you can, I'm sure anybody out there can Google, structures on Mars and find all kinds of people that have posted things. And a lot of it is just, projections, and there's really nothing there. It's over-enhancement of the NASA, images, which creates, pixels and all kinds of distortions. But what we try to do is, we use multiple images that NASA's taken of these certain structures. Like the face on Mars has, like I said, close to 30 images to look at. So you have a whole data set. And not only do we have these pictures, all of the images have ancillary data, which tells you, what time of day, the angle, how high the camera was. So you have all this science, to back your descriptions of what you're seeing, as opposed to just arbitrarily posting things that kind of look interesting. Looks like this rock kind of looks like a monkey or looks like a iguana. That's fun. It's fun to do. I mean, we all can see rocks and things in our backyard that kind of look like the old man in the cave or something and things like that. But we're trying to be more serious here and looking at the images that can be reproduced and not just one-shot deals that a lot of these things are.
Right. So now, what is the crown face? The crown face, geolithic formation apparently found on Mars. Is this something different?
Yeah, this is unlike the face on Mars, which is a three-dimensional structure, kind of like which looks like a large mesa. NASA's always saying, well, it's a butte or it's just a mesa, which is a big mound which has this facial features carved on it. The crown face is actually on the valley of a wall on Mars. It's not a flat feature. It's more of a low relief carving. This was actually found by a member of the Society for Planetary SETI Research, Greg Oram. He found this back in 2000. The original Mars Global Surveyor image was taken in 1999 and released in early 2000. And that's when Greg, going through the NASA photographs at the time, found this. And when he saw this in the strip, he notified some of his colleagues over at the Society for Planetary SETI Research, most importantly, Dr. Tom Van Franlin, who was actually at the time collecting data and other examples of geoglyphic formations on Mars. And he was so impressed with this, he used this in his, he did a press conference at the National Press Club in New York in 2001, which was mentioned in a lot of the newspapers, was on television. It was a very big event. And he actually, this was one of the prime images that he featured at that press conference.
Interesting. Now, what other, and I know there's been many, but could you tell me about some of the other unusual formations that have been found on Mars? Namely, a lot of these geoglyphic type formations. Tell me a little bit more about them and what's being found.
Well, I started doing this in 1998, 1996, early on when the Mars Global Surveyor was taking the newer pictures of the face on Mars, and they started sending back all these newer, higher resolution images of the surface. Because originally all we had to look at were the poor Viking images, which were taken, back in the 70s. So people were finding stuff all over the place. Actually, Bill and I, my co-author, who's a geologist up in Calgary, Canada, I had met him at on one of the discussion boards, actually, that was run by Richard Hoaglands on the Enterprise mission back in 1998. And when Bill and I met, we were finding all this stuff on the surface, structures and geoglyphs, and we actually had enough information to put together for our first book that we put out called the Cydonia Codex. And that book, our first book's just full of these formations. And members of the Society for Planetary SETI Research have been quietly going through all of these images and finding all kinds of things. And that's what brings us to your show tonight, because of this crown face. We only had that one image from the year 2000, and it wasn't until the year 2010 that the Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter actually took two more pictures of this crown face formation, which actually led to us putting together the science paper, which we presented at the Space Technology and Applications International Forum in Albuquerque, New Mexico, last year. I think we were on your program talking about that. I think we were on with, we had presented the Queen Nefertiti face, and I think we were on talking about that also.
Yeah.
Last year. And so we presented the paper there, and then it was eventually submitted to the Journal of Space Exploration. So this science paper has been published in a peer-reviewed science journal, the Journal of Space Exploration, which just came out in the fall issue of the journal. And so we're pretty excited about it. I mean, this is a major geoglyphic formation that was accepted in the Science Journal, and hopefully yourself and some of the other stations and media will take notice of this.
Hey, that would be nice, and that's one of the questions I have, and I know it's kind of, self-explanatory, but I like to ask anyhow, and that is, how are they getting away with this type of news not being major news?
Well, there's a lot of reasons, I think. The media, they don't want to report anything unless, NASA calls them on the phone and says, look what we found. NASA has press conferences constantly for the last 20 years stating that they found evidence that there used to be water on Mars. And then a year would go by and they have another press conference showing slides and images of Mars that show that there used to be water on Mars. And the media, they just play along. And they're at the stage where they're not going to go public with anything unless NASA gives them a phone call and says we're having a press conference. They're waiting for NASA to come out and say they found this stuff. And NASA's not interested in doing that, I don't think.
Well, no, it wouldn't appear that they are. And, that's,
right.
I mean, there's so much more they could be telling us. I'm sure that they're not. I mean, we've got people here on Earth who are just going through their images and finding all kinds of stuff. And I'm not saying that everything that people say is something is, but right. Some things are just indisputable. I mean, you look and you'd almost bet the farm on it if you can go there and check it out.
Especially with the rover going around taking all these photographs of the surface features, right beyond the little rovers that are going around, all these landscape pictures that they're taking, these panoramic views. I mean, there's all kinds of interesting things laying around. And, it seems publicly that NASA just doesn't have any curiosity about looking at any of these so-called rocks that don't look like rocks. I mean, there's things that look like mechanical objects, things that have been blown up. It looks like a battlefield in some of these areas that the rover is driving around. And with all kinds of debris around of structures that have been blown up. Some of these rocks have carvings on the sides. It looks like parts of buildings, and also mechanical instruments sitting around. You can see a lot of this stuff on the internet that people have found. And they have no geological background that they're going to be able to study rocks. I mean, these are just average people that are finding these, and it seems so obvious. And you would think that an organization like NASA that's driving around seeing an odd-looking rock in the distance, that they drive the rover over there and get a close-up picture of it, but they don't. But if they see a rock that is a rock, they'll be sure to drive that rover right up to it and put they have that little tester on there that'll grind the rock and sniff it and see what type of materials it's made of. They have interest in that, but they don't seem to have any interest in something else that may look like it's an artificial structure.
And I'd have to believe that whatever it is, it's not that they're not interested. I'd have to believe that they just want us to think that there's no interest.
Publicly, publicly they're not showing any interest.
Right.
But we don't know what they're doing behind the scenes.
Well, they've got to be doing jumping jacks behind the scenes with what they're finding. I mean, again, at least I would think so. I'm guessing, and even Dr. John Brandenburg, who I've had on several times, he says that one of the problems is people are looking for green vegetation when they should probably be looking for red vegetation up there. And, that could be because of the different sun rays that come through, right?
Right. Well, from what I've seen, I haven't seen any signs of any plant life or anything alive up there. Mars appears to be a pretty dead planet, but there's debris from some civilization that was there in the distant past that's still laying on the surface. Mars is the kind of planet that, if you build the face on Mars, it'll sit there for a very long time because there's really no erosion going on at this time. So it'd be a perfect place to build things that would last, for a very, very long time. And the things that we're seeing, like I was saying with the rover, all this debris around, they seem to be things that have just been blown up or ripped apart and just fragments of things. But they deserve a close examination, and that's not what we're seeing, like I said, publicly. NASA and the media itself would rather, somebody find a rock that looks like an iguana and have that be on Huffington Post and all kinds of newspaper online articles, and they more poke fun at the discoverer than looking at it serious. And something like this crown face formation that we have published in the Science Journal, I've gotten no attention so far from any of the newspapers.
That's just, I guess I shouldn't be surprised, and I'm really not. But you would think that something like that, they wouldn't, they wouldn't be able to pass up on it, because you've got alternative medias, you've got independent medias, you've got all these others,
right,
that who are putting it out there, and so that only further makes them look like frauds when they don't pick up on it. And I can't imagine that they're afraid that it might make them look ridiculous. I have to believe that they're not allowed maybe to pick up on this stuff. Maybe.
Well, that's what you would think. Like, they've gotten a letter from the government saying, do not cover any stories like this unless we, give them the official stamp.
Yeah, that's true. So, what would all this mean now? You say that, obviously there had to have been another civilization there, and I don't know, I have a hard time not speculating that we might have had something to do with that civilization, because it seems that there was some kind of maybe a war there or something. When you talk to, like, again, Dr. John Brandenburg, who believes that nukes were detonated there. What do you think? Was it that severe?
Oh, well, Dr. Brandenburg not only believes there was 2 nuclear explosions there, he has proof.
Well, yeah.
He uses NASA's own data to prove that, and he's got, I think, 2 science papers that have been published in journals that go into depth, with all the science, and it's undisputable. And the signatures that are up there are isotopes that are caused by nuclear bomb explosions, not something that's natural. I'm not a scientist. I'm just trying to quote what Dr. John Brandenburg has brought to light. But he basically has overwhelming proof that there was some type of a detonation, 2 of them, on Mars. And the signatures are there, and NASA knows about it, and they just haven't gone public with it. According to him, they've known about this since the Viking images came back, and all the testing that was done, which doesn't get a lot of attention, but they did testing of the atmosphere and things like that with the Viking landers, and they found out early on that there was some type of nuclear event on Mars, and it wasn't natural.
Yeah, well, and so then I come back to what's your thoughts on this? What does this mean to you? Have you started trying? I imagine you've started trying to put this kind of together.
Right, trying to connect the dots. Well, when you add the idea that there was this nuclear explosion on Mars, Brandenburg doesn't know if this was caused by the inhabitants of the planet, or his idea is that some extraterrestrial came and destroyed the planet because they were advancing to a point where I guess they were getting dangerous. I'd recommend any of the listeners out there to go read his current book, which goes into great detail about his theory and all of the evidence that he has. But according to Brandenburg's theory, that Mars had evolved to a point where some extraterrestrial got the attention of some extraterrestrial civilization, and they took Mars out. They just destroyed it. And he thinks that may happen to us, depending on how advanced we get, and the prospects of going into space. And this may be one reason why we don't have any space program, is because we got the word from whoever that you might want to just stay on Earth and do not go to the moon and other planets. So we may be stuck here, depending on what kind of threats we got from these extraterrestrials. And the other theory is that maybe this was an indigenous conflict that happened with the Mars civilization, like we have conflicts with the Muslim Brotherhood and ISIS and the Russians, and there was this nuclear war. Something similar could have happened on Mars. Things got out of hand. They just nuked each other.
Well,
destroyed the planet.
You know what I worry about? I don't stay up at night worrying about this, but I think about, what if the same people who caused the destruction on Mars are the same people who are now here controlling things here? Because it seems like whoever that was on Mars, it doesn't seem like the message got across that nukes are bad and we shouldn't be playing with them because we've got a planet full of them here.
Right. Well, that's the other theory, is that it was an indigenous culture that blew themselves up, and the survivors left Mars because they destroyed the planet and came here, and we are the descendants of that, warlike culture. I mean, because humans aren't very friendly people. I mean, we hold grudges, we attack people, we blow things up.
Yeah,
we're not little Boy Scouts.
We sure, absolutely. Now, what do you find in common? And I'm sure there's plenty. Find in common with what is being found on Mars and with what has been found here on Earth. And I don't even mean just the animal art that I've seen, but even like pyramids and things like that. I mean, it seems like we've got the same thing going on here. And so again, it kind of makes me connect the two. Like, I don't know, like, hey, this house is no good no more. Let's pack up, family. We're going to move to that other one way over there.
Right. Well, that's the thoughts that I have, is that whatever happened to Mars, I'm thinking it was an indigenous conflict, and the victors came to Earth and settled on Earth. And I think once the dust settled on Mars, thousands of years after the destruction, that the inhabitants of Earth, the advanced civilization that came here from Mars, went back to Mars and left all of these geoglyphs that we're finding now on the planet after it was destroyed. Because a lot of the evidence that we're seeing, these things seem to have been built after the planet was dead. These aren't structures that were put on an active planet, because, as you know, even on Earth, even look at Mount Rushmore. That has to constantly be maintained. That's something that has to be looked at from a distance. Mm-hmm. Same type of idea we're seeing on these structures on Mars. And I think that this indigenous people that had left Mars came back and left these formations on the surface for us to see in the future.
Now,
we're doing now.
Yeah, well, that makes sense. I was going to ask how we would know exactly when these things might have been created, but that's a good point. If they had the weather systems and stuff and that we have here, then it would probably deteriorate much quicker, right? But they do have storms and stuff there, right? I mean, they have weather patterns, don't they?
Well, I guess you hear a lot about Mars dust storms, and Hollywood likes to talk about these dust storms. NASA has actually taken pictures of some little, and from what I've seen, they're very small little storms, little dust devils. Mars doesn't have a lot of gravity. I mean, I'm not a scientist. I don't know how Mars has these tremendous dust storms like you see in these science fiction movies, when there's really not much atmosphere there. I don't know where they're getting all the pressure and the wind. At one point they're telling us Mars doesn't have an atmosphere and there's no air. There's nothing there. It's practically a vacuum. There's hardly, there's no water. But then they tell you the water's under the surface, and with all of this limited amount of atmosphere and pressures, like I said, I'm not a scientist. I just don't understand how they can have these enormous dust storms that they talk about. And I don't see any evidence on the surface that there's been any type of disturbance like this. A massive, huge... The movie that was just out, I guess, about Mars, there's another scene in that where they have the huge dust storms that seem to be very, very dramatic.
Yeah, I think I've heard that some of the storms could get up to 300 miles an hour or something like that. And I don't know how true that is, but
yeah, I don't see it. Like I said, I'm not a scientist. I'd have to have somebody explain to me how something like that can happen. When you have on one end of the spectrum, they're telling us that there's nothing there on Mars. There's no atmosphere, and then they're talking about these huge storms where you have to have pressure fronts and everything to cause these type of storms. So,
well,
I may be babbling, but it just doesn't make sense to me.
I guess one other answer for that would be then is that how much are they actually telling us? How much truth are they actually giving us when it comes to planets, moons? I mean, boy, I would hate to think that every little thing is a lie. What if, what if it does have a good atmosphere there? What if there's things going on there? And I don't know. It's just that would be. I guess I wouldn't be too shocked, but if they're having big storms, that's like the moon. It was explained about these sailing stones that sail through. They move through the desert and leave a trail, and they says, well, then it's because ice is forming. And the winds is pushing them. And I said, okay, if we're going to go with that here on Earth, then how is it happening on the moon too? Because on the moon they have the same phenomena, these stones that slide.
Yeah, I've seen pictures of some of these marks where there's a big boulder and then there's this line where it had moved. So yeah, these are certainly anomalies.
Yeah. So you just got to wonder if there's just stuff they don't understand, or do they understand perfectly well and they want to make sure we don't? I mean, that's always the question, isn't it? So,
and there's a lot of distractions in the world. So while everything else is going on, in the media, I mean, we're here working on these Mars images that trying to break through all of the noise in the media to try to get some attention to this.
Right, and I think we should. You would think it's just like the afterlife. You would think people would have a big interest in these things because, it's well. I mean, with Mars, it could be very well have answers as to who we are, and the afterlife. Well, we're all going to get there, so you think you'd want to know about this, but I guess some people just don't care, and some are paid not to care. So then you feel like these features on Mars were actually done later after the planet had gone through whatever it went through, and they were purposely placed there for us to see. And I find that fascinating because I've always thought that whoever put even the face or faces on Mars, I've always thought that whoever did it, or whoever they are, that it was obviously done to be seen from the sky. So almost like, well, when the kids are big enough and they could drive, they'll be able to see this, and at that point they'll be able to handle it.
Right. Once we become a space-faring culture and going into the great beyond there, orbiting other planets, that we would see these. And I guess from our perspective, starting out with the face on Mars and all the research that Bill and I did with our first two books, starting with the Cydonia Codex and then the Martian Codex, we found a lot of these, almost everything we were finding, all had a direct correlation with the artwork and iconography of Mesoamerica. Even this crown face feature, which is these three sliced and conjoined faces, comes right out of the artwork of Mesoamerica. So that is another interesting aspect of what we're finding on Mars.
Yeah. Now, tell me more about these different formations. Like, do you have I guess you'd have a spot on your website then where people can go and actually see pictures and such?
Yeah. If the listeners want to go to the Cydonia Institute, just type in the Cydonia Institute and it'll come up, and just go to our main page. And we have a directory there where there's a listing of articles that we've written about the face on Mars and some of the other structures that we found. We also have a discussion board, the Cydonia Institute discussion board. There's a link to that right on the Cydonia Institute website. If the listeners are out there and want to see the crowned face that we're discussing here tonight, they can go to the Cydonia Institute website, look at the toolbar at the top, and there's a bar there that says discussion. Click on discussion, and it'll bring up a link to the Cydonia Institute discussion board. And if they get to the Cydonia Institute discussion board, just look for the crown face. It's right there in the list of discussions. You don't have to be a member to access any of the articles. If you want to post comments, you have to become just fill out a little application there. But just for tonight's discussion, if they go to the Cydonia Institute discussion board, click on the crown face, go to page 2, and there's what I've done for the discussion here tonight is put up 5 different images of what we're talking about here. The first image, labeled A, Are you able to access yourself there?
Yes, sir. I'm there right now. I'm on page 2, and I'm just waiting for further direction.
Right. So if you scroll down to the image A, which is labeled the crown face, that shows the original. On the left, there's the original 2000 image of the crown face formation. That's the one that Greg Orme had discovered. And we only had that one image for 10 years. NASA never took another picture of this for 10 years. Greg had sent in, NASA has a program where the public can request images of different features on the surface. It's a great program. You can just sign up and put in the coordinates and give them a reason for why you want to have this area photographed. And you obviously can't put in, I'd like to have it photographed because it looks like a face. You have to give them some type of geological reason to take images. So after 10 years of Greg requesting images, the Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter took 2 new images of that formation, which we use. If the audience doesn't realize, if you're going to produce or submit a science paper to a journal, with this type of research, you have to have at least 3 images of this formation for comparison, because each image would have different ancillary data with the angle of the camera and the time of day that it was taken, and the resolution of the image. So all that stuff would have to be available for them to look at, for in your paper. So we have 3 images. The one on the right there is just one of the 2010 images. Now, if the listeners go down to image B.
Well, hold on a second. Now, okay, I went to the general board. Is that where I'm going here?
Yeah, and there should be, you click on that, it'll give you a list of all the articles that are on there. I think the top one is the crown face.
Okay, I see administration note and then the crown face, and it says it has 2 pages. That one?
Yeah, you click on that, and when you get on there, just go to page 2.
Oh, okay. Simple enough. So everybody, I'm going to, I've been putting the links in the chat room too, for everybody, so to help them out. But, okay, if you want to go along and follow, and here's the link. I'm putting it in the chat room now.
Oh, very nice. Thanks.
Yeah, okay.
I guess we should have done this earlier, but
oh no, that's quite all right. This is fun. I mean, it's live radio. I mean, it just shows nothing's planned. We're just, all right. So here I am.
Radio with pictures.
Yeah, radio with pictures. Exactly. All right. So here we go, and wow. I mean, I'm looking at that's just incredible. I mean, there's no disputing that's a face. It's not like seeing something in a cloud.
No, and if you stand back from your monitor, get a little more perspective, that middle face really jumps. He looks like he's just looking right at you. I mean, it's amazing.
Yeah.
The photographic quality of this image is pretty astounding. It's almost photographic. The tonality of the features, the plasticity of it, it's amazing.
And it's just like this Aztec picture that you
right now. If you scroll down to the image labeled B, that's just my line drawing showing you how the three individual faces are sliced down. They're half images. They're not complete images of a face, which your average viewer would say, well, why would somebody do that? That's kind of crazy. Why not have a full symmetrical face to look at? Why are we looking at 3 sliced in half portraits? Well, if you scroll down below the drawing, you'll see a Aztec mask which is called the 3 faces of life. It shows in the center you have the youthful young man's face. The other 2 sliced off faces is the old age, and then of course the one on the bookend on each end is death. So you have youth, old age, and death there in this one image.
Uh-huh.
And they're just sliced open and pulled apart, just like we're seeing on the surface of Mars.
That's incredible.
Yeah, it's a very similar type of iconography, the same type of motif that we're seeing on Mars. So this gives a cultural reference for why we're seeing this type of artwork. And if we move right along and go down to the the image labeled D, we have an image of the American artist Mark Rothko. Now, most of the listeners out there, if they know Mark Rothko, he did a lot of color field paintings, which would have just like 3 bands of color, very abstract, huge paintings. That's what he was mostly known for in art history. His place in art history placed him with these color field paintings that were very moody and just flowing colors and just very basic blocks of color. These paintings here, this is his earlier work before he got into the abstract color field paintings. Early on in the 1940s, Mark Rothko was very interested in Greek mythology, and automatic writing was something that was being used with artists at the time, and also just automatic painting. People were just doing dreamlike paintings and things like that out of their subconscious. So this painting called the Omen of the Eagle from 1942, if you look on the left side, that's the full painting there. And notice the band of heads across the top. And what I've done is I just I compared the band of heads to the crown face on Mars, showing a very similar idea of how he put these half portraits together. Are you taking a look at that?
I am. I'm looking at it now, and I'm wondering, I mean, he obviously didn't know about these faces on Mars.
But it makes you look, it looks like, God, he must have seen this.
That's what I'm thinking. I'm like, what did he know? I mean, you hear about people who say, oh, well, this message came to my head and told me to do this, and sometimes we laugh at stuff like that. Maybe it happens.
Now, if you look at the first portrait there on the left, the half face, notice his treatment of the hair, the brush strokes, almost looks like the crown that you're seeing on the crown face on Mars. There's the eye, the nose, the mouth. He's got a little ear there.
Yeah.
It's pretty striking.
It is. I mean, very, very striking. Wow.
So it's a great comparison. So that's an example of modern art showing a similar technique of what we're seeing on Mars. But one thing on Mars is a low relief sculpture, and the Mark Rothko is just a painting. So where's the examples of land art? Geoglyphs. Well, in 2014 at the National Mall in Washington D.C., one of the museums over there, I think it was the Portrait Gallery, they commissioned this Cuban American artist who's very well known. He's produced these huge geoglyphs all over the world, Spain, over in Europe, and his name's George Rodriguez. And he does these huge geoglyphs that can be photographed from above. What he produced for the Washington, D.C. Mall area was he was invited to do this portrait, and he had spent a couple weeks going around the city of Washington here and photographing the people that were working in the area, the indigenous people of Washington, D.C., and the minority groups. And he took all of these portraits that he took with his camera and put them into a computer program which came out with this generic face, which we see here. And he called this Out of Many One.
Mm-hmm.
If you ask me, it looks a little bit like Obama, but he says it's a generic face. And you notice the way it's not a complete face. Now, if we had found this on Mars, it's not a complete symmetrical-looking face. There's just one eye. There's a part of a nose is missing. There's lips, a chin. There's the head. There's no ears. The critics would say, well, that's not a complete face. That's nothing. But this was artwork produced right here on Earth, right on the mall. This thing is huge. And this is a photograph from the air coming down. You see the tree line. Some of the shadows are obscuring part of the face. But you notice the treatment of it's almost like cross-hatching, the way it's almost like a drawing into the ground. Now, this is all done with dirt. This is different color soils that they brought in and produced this huge portrait. If any of the listeners are interested, just type in on your Google Out of Many One by George Rodriguez, and there's a couple websites about this construction of this formation. And in my image files, I didn't send any here for us to look at tonight, but if they're interested, they go look at some of these. They actually show the workmen standing on the ground with these huge lines, and you can't even tell what you're looking at because it's up close. So those lines that you're seeing around the face that are creating the eye and the shading around the eye socket and the nose, those just look like long strips on the ground. You can't even tell what it is. And you'll hear at times a lot of critics say, well, if we zoom in on the face on Mars, we need to get these higher resolution pictures so we can zoom in there and take a look at it. But these things weren't produced to be looked at up close, just like this portrait that was commissioned here in Washington, D.C. They're produced to be viewed at a certain perspective, so everything comes together and you actually can see the image. Just like the crown face on Mars, you step back from the screen and it even gets clear. I mean, it's amazing, the detail. And that's the same thing we're having here with this portrait.
Yeah, that makes absolute sense. So when they say they need to get a close-up, basically they want to just get distorted pictures and say, nah, it's nothing.
Right. If you were to look at the Mona Lisa and you zoom in on her lips, you'd go close up on the upper and lower lip, and it would look like anything because you'd see the brush strokes in there and the swirlings, and people say, "Oh, they're not lips. That's nothing."
Yeah.
And that, it's not intended to be looked at that up close. It all comes together with the proper viewing distance. Now, just to wrap this up, what I did at the last image labeled F, is I just cropped out the center face from the crown face and put it right next to the out of one many, and that's pretty stunning right there. I mean, that's almost the same perspective, like they're peeking around the corner. You can see the eye, nose, and mouth. It's pretty stunning. And that's what we're seeing on Mars, the same type of idea, the sliced facial portraits.
Yeah, almost kind of, even the lips and everything look pretty close. I had a guy come on my show who said, you might know who I'm talking about, but he said that he teleported to Mars and that Obama was there too. And I see something like this. This might back him up.
I don't know. Well, like I said, George Rodriguez says that this is a generic face, but, considering we have a black president in office, and he does look a little bit like this guy here, so
yeah,
I don't know if he's just saying it's a generic portrait or it was a portrait of Obama, but it kind of looks like him. And if you go back to the image before that, image E, that whole area with the hair, that's just black dirt up there. There's like really no detail. But it really all comes together, when you're, like I said, viewed at the proper viewing distance. It's pretty amazing. And I would encourage a lot of the listeners to go look up this portrait and go to the website that shows how they did this with the geocentric alignments and everything to get the measurements. It's pretty technical. That it's amazing to look at the ground views of the eye. It doesn't even look like an eye.
Oh, I bet. I mean, it's just like if you're traveling, you're in your car and you're driving, and you'll look up at some of the mountains and you'll see these big, lines where trees have been brushed out for like electrical poles or whatever. If you're there and you're walking through, I mean, it's nothing to you. But when you see it from a distance, you see it for what it is, and that's that's how this stuff is. And even like this picture here at the mall, I mean, that's just incredible. And to find that somewhere else,
Yeah. Well, I live here in Virginia, and Washington, D.C. is about 45 minutes from me. So I remember when this was over there, this got a lot of attention.
Oh, I bet it did. Did. So you've got the crown face, and what else? I mean, what else are you keeping a keen eye on as far as Mars is concerned? I've seen. I can only describe his art. Looks like birds. Looks like one guy. He did a YouTube video, and this guy he did some really good work. He took these pictures and he kind of toned back the color a bit. And when he did that, I mean, boy, the stuff that was coming out. I mean, you could literally see what looked like alligators with, not that they were alive, they were like statues.
Yeah, these big structures. Yeah, I've seen that guy's work. He through enhancement and getting rid of, because he uses the color images that once they put the color over, it kind of masks everything off. And what he's done is tried to do this reverse technique that he's using with the enhancements and revealing a lot of structure in these. And I've actually gone to the NASA, some of the original images that they use in those larger images that he's using, and a lot of those formations that he's bringing out are there. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. George, we've got a break coming up here. So why don't we go ahead and take that, and then we'll come back and talk some more. So hang on with us for just a moment. And so, George, let me ask you, does it look like we're going down the same path that maybe, I don't know, the Martian civilization may have? I mean, don't it seem like it's repeating itself or something? I mean, that would indicate that we know what happened. And I think that we've got some of the pieces to that puzzle, right?
Well, it's interesting that you say that because, we may be closely related to whoever, destroyed Mars. As Richard Hoagland once said, we may be the Martians.
Yeah, well, I honestly, I think that we are. I think we've maybe some of us, anyways, may have come.
And I guess we have a bad habit of destroying our home planets.
Right. Or is there this, and here I go into conspiracy, I guess, but is there this elite cabal that, I mean, we always say that they're looking for ways to live forever, like the presidents of Googles and things like that. Maybe they have lived forever. Maybe they're, it's like, all right, they're getting too smart again. It's time to wipe them out and create another, stupid race. I don't know.
Well, what we found with this research is, like I had stated a little earlier, that a lot of these geoglyphic formations and this artwork, the collection of artwork that we're seeing on Mars, all seem to have a direct correlation to the artwork that we're finding in Mesoamerica, starting with the face on Mars, the parrot formation. I think we were on here once before talking about that. All of these things we can be analyzed and find its artistic creation leads itself back to artwork that we're seeing in Mesoamerica with mythologies and creation stories. And what Bill and I, my co-author with the Sidonia Codex and the Martian Codex, what we found that the Maya had a mythology about this whole scenario that we're finding on Mars. The creation gods in Mesoamerica had written a book it was the great book that they had written called the Popol Vuh. And the Popol Vuh is basically the history of the Maya creation stories. Talked about how the creation gods got together and created all the animals, created the earth and all the people and humans. And we think that what we're seeing on Mars with all these geoglyphs is the lost book of the Maya Popol Vuh. All of these geoglyphs are basically telling a story from the creation mythology. And the other interesting thing is that we were speculating that these structures were placed on Mars after Mars was a dead planet, after the dust had settled, going back to Dr. Brandenburg's discovery of these two explosions, this apocalypse that happened on Mars. Again, back in Mesoamerican mythology and stories that are written in their hieroglyphs, in a town called Naranjo in Mexico, they talk about an ancient star war that happened between the people of Naranjo and a place called Six Earth Place, which its patron god was the Zip Monster, which is actually Mars. So what they talk about this place that they had a war with called Six Earth Place was actually the planet Mars. And this is all documented in Mayan hieroglyphs in the town of Naranjo, Mexico. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah, well, it is, and I'll tell you something else amazing is a guy who Gary McKinley, I think McKinley, this guy who hacked into the NASA computers, and I brought him up a lot the last month, I guess. So listeners might be saying, "Oh my God, him again?" But this guy, he hacked into the NASA computers, and I emailed back and forth with him, and he told me that they had found. That he had found evidence of a space fleet, a secret space program in which the Navy, the U.S. Navy, actually has a fleet in space. I mean, and why would the guy lie? I mean, and there was some document about non-human security forces or something along them lines, but it labeled them as non-human, and that could either be mechanical or it could
Right.
be something else.
Well, most people don't realize that NASA is under the auspice of the Department of Defense.
Yeah, well, yeah, exactly.
And so they have to abide by all of the rules and regulations set forth by the Department of Defense. So, this is supposed to be a public space program, open knowledge to the public. But when you're controlled by the Department of Defense, I mean, that's a whole different ballgame.
Oh, yeah, that's true, too. So, it's amazing. And now with them announcing that that there's water flowing on Mars, I mean, is it possible that there could still be something? I mean, I guess it's possible, right? Something survived and maybe still.
Well, I think if we find any kind of life on Mars, I think they're kind of gearing the public up for this with all the programs and all the research they're doing with extreme environments where they're going to, the hottest deserts and down by volcanoes, and they're finding microbial life, and then they're going to the Antarctic, and they're doing these ice drillings, and they're bringing up all these layers of ice, down into the earth, and they're finding that there's this microbial life is still down there, that they're finding all this evidence of life on Earth that exists in these extreme environments, that it would just be logical that if we look at an extreme environment such as Mars, that we're going to find some type of microbial life, and maybe very small insects or something like that. I'm just speculating. But I think at the least, or at the most, they're going to find some type of microbial life and go public with that, probably within the next 5 years.
Well, hey, even finding mosquitoes would be incredible.
Right. Well, ants and cockroaches seem to, live anywhere, in any kind of environment. So.
Oh, that's true.
There's even species of, I think, scorpions that have been frozen, and when they're thawed out, they come to life.
Wow, I think there's certain what is it? I was just reading about something like that. Some kind of fish. It's not actually a fish, but it is a fish, and it does that. It'll look like go into the water, it'll get frozen.
Yeah, they go down into the mud, and they're like in suspended animation down there, or something. I think toads and frogs do this kind of thing too, where they're down there for years, and then when it rains, and they come back to life.
That's
the same thing with these little scorpions. They can be frozen, and you think they're dead, and then when they thaw out, they're alive. It's like how does that happen?
Oh, I know a guy.
So they're capable of doing that. There might be some type of small little creatures on Mars, something larger than microbial life. But I think the government is going to give it the okay to go public with some type of report that they're in the next 5 years, the next probe that goes up will probably discover that.
Well, wow, I hope it's sooner than that. I mean, it'd be nice. I mean, for me, as far as the question of whether we're alone, for me, that's not even a question anymore. I don't believe that we are alone. I don't think that anybody who does believe that we're alone, I don't know where their mind is. I mean, in the vast universe, there's something. It doesn't necessarily have to be next door to us, but there's something out there. And now it's a matter of really figuring out who we are and where we came from. And, if we came from a monkey or we came from Mickey Mouse or whatever it is, I'm okay with it. I just want to know the truth.
Might be a little combination of both.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, Disney might have had his hand in there. I don't know. But, we're wanting to find out what's going on with Mars. And I don't know if you've seen the news, but we had another probe that was going to Mars, the InSight spacecraft, which was just they were unable to get there was some kind of leaky fuel system in the spacecraft that was going to go up that they haven't been able to fix. So they scrubbed the launch in March of the new probe going up. So we can't launch that now until 2018. So we're set back again.
Oh, that's right, because they got to wait until it's in a certain, position.
Right, yeah, it's every, I don't know, so many months 24 months or whatever it is, 22 months, something like that. I'm not sure, but the window of opportunity for the next launch is not going to be till 2018. So they just scrapped the InSight spacecraft, which people interested in this was kind of hopeful to go up, but that's not going to go anywhere.
Well, I can't wait until it does, and they do more research, But again, it's going to take independent researchers who have to go over these photos, and because I don't know, will they announce it to us? I mean, will they tell us if they? I mean, it took them how long to tell us that there was actually water on the planet, and they knew.
Oh, you're right. I mean, they were doing this every year. Like I said, they would have press conferences that they found evidence of past water, and that's all we would hear over and over again. And finally, they've actually come out and said they found the brinish type of water flowing on the surface. I mean, that was a big breakthrough. But that only gets about 5 minutes of attention, in the media, and then they're on to the next disaster in the world. And most people have probably forgotten about that news, which just happened a couple months ago.
Yeah,
which was big news, major news. I mean, if there's water, we can go to Mars and set up a colony. You can do anything once you have water.
Well, that's true. That's true. You can, and again, they tell us that the atmosphere is very thin and not breathable, and this and that. And okay, they're probably right, but at this point, they've lied to us so much that I don't know. I mean, we could get up there. It could be beach resorts on the other side of that planet. You just never know.
Right, there's all the controversy with, is it a blue sky or is it a red sky?
Yeah, there is, and it'd be nice if we could just go and look for ourselves, but that's not going to happen anytime soon. I've got some questions here from a few of our listeners, and folks, I'll remind you, if you want to call in, you may do so at 803-392-4566, or you could call us Skype to Skype, LNM Radio. And I'll take questions in the chat as well if you private message me. That's at latenightinthemidlands.com in our chat and listen page. You'll see a chat room there. You can private message me. If you don't know how to do that, you can ask one of our moderators. They have the letters LNM after their name, so you can't mistake them. All right, so we got Nancy, and Nancy's in England. She said, where exactly is the water coming from on Mars? I guess because they say there's like no atmosphere or very thin atmosphere. So where's the water coming from? I guess that would be from below the ground, right? Or no?
Well, I think the images that they're looking at, seeing the water seepage, is a lot of times they're finding these in craters. The craters have these large rims around it, which is exposing a lot of the different sediments and the layers of around the outer rim of the crater. So a lot of times, I mean, for years we've seen pictures of the Martian surface with these long lines, these seeps going down. And for a long time, there was a lot of debate about, what were these seeps? Were they just rocks that had fallen down from the rim of the crater, causing a ripple going down? But we would never see any, boulders at the bottom of these ripples. These actually just looked like there was something was making the surface wet. We don't know if it was water, if it was oil, or if it was some other type of liquid. But after 15 years of these photographs and of observations by NASA, they've finally come to the conclusion that these seeps that we're seeing are caused by brinish water, which basically is water with a lot of salt in it, which, of course, has a lower freezing temperature. So that's what they're speculating that this water is. It's not oil. It's not some kind of other liquid. It is a water-based liquid that we're seeing that's probably heavily salted, so it, can be able to come out on the surface and flow down.
Okay, and then she asks also one more question from Nancy. She says, how come we can't just point the Hubble telescope at Mars and see?
I don't know.
I don't either.
My background is in art. I'm a sculptor or a painter. I exhibited up in the city in the 80s, and so my the reason that I'm used in these papers, and my discipline is art and sculpture, and I know a formation when I see it. But as for why the scientists don't use the Hubble telescope to even photograph the moon, I have no idea. I don't know the technical aspects with that. Sorry.
Okay, fair enough. And now some of these, as you call it, art, some of this stuff has got great detail. Like I seen one of what looked like I guess a parrot or a bird of some sort, and it looked like there was great detail in the wings.
Oh yeah, well that was one of the formations discovered by Will Faust, one of the members of the Sidonia Institute. And NASA, actually there's a new picture that just released a couple months ago from the Mars Reconnaissance High-Rise camera, the CTX camera on board. And so we now have 5 different pictures of that, which confirm the formation's existence there on the surface. It's not just, one image that kind of looks like a bird, but the parrot formation that you're talking about was examined by 3 independent veterinarians and an avian specialist, and they found 17 points of anatomical correctness. So this was a really very important discovery, and not only did it have all of these anatomical features, it had a very prominent wing structure.
And I'm no expert, but I'd have to say that I don't think just out of nature there's going to be that many points that that perfect, that kind of.
Well, even looking at if people want to compare this research, though, you're just seeing illusions. These are like looking at clouds. Cloud formations are usually just very general. They're usually a profile, an outline. Kind of looks like a face or a bird or whatever, but there's no detail in any of that. And clouds really aren't a good comparison to what we're seeing on Mars, because when you're looking at clouds, we know what clouds look like. I mean, we see them every day. You look outside, of course, if it's a cloudy day, and we know the different types of clouds: the cirrus clouds, the cumulus clouds, and we also know when you see a chemtrail from a plane go by, a straight line, we know that's not a cloud. That's an artificial feature, a chemtrail. Or if somebody's doing some skywriting, we know that's not clouds because that's something that man put up there. It's an artificial feature. And I think we can do the same thing looking at these formations on Mars, that we know generally what natural formations are. Sometimes, of course, a rock can look like a bird or an iguana or a hamster or a snake or whatever. But we know its limitations, that it's just a generalization of that creature. It doesn't look like it had any intelligent design to it. Intelligent design would obviously show more detail.
Right. All right. We've got Michael in New York, and he says, does it mean that there's life on Mars? And we kind of just covered that. Meaning the fact of water and even the geoglyphs or what have you. I guess that would indicate that there probably once was, but it doesn't necessarily mean there is right now, right?
No, personally, from what I've seen, Mars looks like a dead, desolate planet with all of these ruins all over the place and bits and pieces of machinery that we're seeing with the rover driving by, and of course all these large-scale geoglyphs that we can see with the orbiters. But as for people living there, if there's anybody there, they're obviously not on the surface. People speculate that there's underground civilizations living there. Obviously, you could speculate about that all day long, but we don't have any evidence that there's anybody there. I mean, it's easy to say there's people living under the ground when you can't see them.
That's right, it is, and
but I don't see any evidence for it.
True, but I will say this, though. You look at here on Earth, and you look at some of the structures that have been built below ground here, and how they're able to, put controlled climates and, air conditioning, heat, and even, like, all kinds of stuff they've been able to do under the ground, very deep. And, so I guess there's no proof. I agree with you, but, man, I wouldn't rule it out. It could be.
Well, I want to, and I guess in that to support that type of idea, if you wanted to build something on Mars, you probably would go underground because you'd want to be away from all the radiation hitting the surface. So you'd want to build stuff underground.
Sure.
And of course, some of the early researchers here, looking at some of the structures, the pyramids at Cydonia, speculated that these were big arcologies, that were just these big structures with everything going on underneath. And of course, the face on Mars may just be a big structure that has buildings and rooms and archives hidden inside. We're not going to know until we go there.
All right. Patty is in Kansas City. Great show, she said. Thank you. Says, why has NASA not had a manned mission to Mars? I guess there's reasons for that. Now, if you ask the right people, well, certain people anyways, will tell you there has been, and we just don't know about it. But I don't know. Right. So why do you think there's not? I guess could we say, I guess, on a mainstream level, that they just don't know enough to send people there yet?
Well, I think if we wanted to go there, we'd go. It's just there's no public interest to go there. If they came out publicly and said that, we found artificial structures on Mars, maybe that would give the incentive for, the funding to go there. But there's so many other things that, Congress and the Senate and the President, they have other agendas that they're looking at. And, the public right now is not even thinking about going to Mars. They're more concerned about, terrorism and, the economy and unemployment and things like that, global warming,
yeah,
all kinds of things like that. So, this is something your average person doesn't even think of, and they think it's a waste of money, most people. We stopped going to the moon because of funding. Nobody thought it was worthwhile. We had gone there a couple times, and people were getting bored with it and saying, why don't we spend this money at home? And so you have all this conflict going on. And going to Mars, it's a long trip. Probably going to take at least a year to get there, and a lot of money to put the technology together. And what you're going to do when you land there. There's all different types of scenarios that scientists have put together about going to Mars. You don't necessarily have to go to Mars and come back. I believe the scenario where you go to Mars and you set up a colony and you stay there, and then just another group comes in and lands, and you just set up a whole scientific community there. Why come back?
Well, yeah, exactly. I mean, but then and there's people. Believe me, there's enough people who are willing to go too. I
heard that when they had the announcement about if people were interested in going to Mars, the one-way ticket, and they got overwhelming responses.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd be happy if they just put live webcams up on the moon, and just so I can every now and then check in on my computer and watch what's going on the moon. That it's just, with our technology, you'd think that they would do stuff like that, but I know why they don't. I mean, they don't want you to.
They don't want you to see what's on the moon either.
No, they don't want you to see see anything before they do. That's for sure. I mean, could you imagine? You get some weird guy in a suit that comes up and starts looking in the lens like, what's this? I mean, that would be great.
Want that.
All right, so we've got Len. He's in New Jersey. He says, could people live on Mars now? And again, we kind of just covered that underground, right?
Or in some type of, cubicles, environmental things. There's a scientist put out a book a couple years ago. I can't remember his name right now, but he had speculated his idea to go to Mars was to bring all of the buildings there first, and then bring the first group of people, and they could, have the buildings there already.
Mm-hmm.
Put them together in cubicle type of structures. So it could be done.
Right.
But again, I don't think there's any public interest in doing it.
I wonder why. Well, I don't wonder, I guess. But, wouldn't it have made sense to land this probe in the Cydonia area to be able to, roam around, maybe look for a door or something in the nostril, or I don't know.
well, yeah, but, they send all these probes far away from the Cydonia area.
They do, and it's crazy. You would think, okay, well, we want to prove to people that there's nothing there, so let's put it there and let's just show them. After all, it's supposed to be our tax dollars that are doing this, right? So why not give the people what they want and let's go check it out? Let's cruise around.
Well, the amazing thing is they sent the probes that are there now with the little rovers driving around. I guess they assumed that they'd go to this place and there'd be nothing there, but they're even far away from the Cydonia area, and they're finding all kinds of anomalies and weird things sitting around on the ground. So I guess wherever they go on Mars, they're going to find something.
Well, I think so, too. I think they are going to find a lot on Mars. I think they already have. And,
right.
Obviously...
Well, we've got 3 science papers out that are showing the, overwhelming evidence, we think, of artificial structures on Mars, and 2 books full of these things. So, the evidence out there. It's just that we're trying to get the public interest, and that's one reason why we're on your show tonight, to try to get the public interested in looking at this stuff, and like you said, make your own decision, especially with this crown face formation. We have 3 official NASA photographs, showing this. It's still there after 10 years, the first image they took, so it wasn't something that just happened to be the way the rocks fell off the side of this valley wall. This thing is permanent. It's there. All of the features are there. All of the stones, if you want to call them stones or whatever causes this relief, everything is still there. You can compare the pictures, and it's a consistent artwork that we're seeing.
All right, I got one more question here, and then what I'll do is I'll take our last break and come back and give you the floor. Unless anybody else has questions. Carrie in California says, how do we get to the truth once and for all? And I think you were actually just covering that. It's important that you look at the work that these researchers are putting out there and share it, right?
Sure. There's if they go to your main page there where you have a link for the Society for Planetary Study Research, I'm sure a lot of your listeners will be surprised to find out that there's over 20 papers that have been published dealing with these artifacts on Mars, listed there from the membership of the Society for Planetary Study Research. So this stuff, the research is going on. We're actively trying to get papers published, and one of the big hurdles is trying to get the mainstream media to make the public aware of these.
All right, and we do have a call. We've got 336 area code. You are on Late Night in the Midlands. First name, where you're calling from, please.
Hey, this is Joe from Winston-Salem, North Carolina.
Well, welcome aboard, Joe.
Hey, thanks for taking my call. Great show. George, I got both your books. They're fantastic, the research that you do. It's very much appreciated. Can I ask you a question? Do you believe in the exploding planet hypothesis?
Which caused the asteroid belt?
Correct. That Mars was once a moon to a larger planet.
Well, Dr. Tom Van Franlin, he had one of the first people to come up with this idea, this thesis. And I, again, not being a scientist, my art background, from what I've read and observed, it looks like it could be a possibility. If you look at the planets, they all seem to be placed in a certain pattern. They all seem to be equally distanced from each other. And then you get to the asteroid belt, and that's where a planet used to be, it looks like. So
okay, well, what I guess I'm getting at, in another interview I heard you do, you mentioned how some of the geoglyphs down there, some of them look pristine.
Oh, yes, that's
and
why
what I'm getting at, if it was a moon,
right,
and the planet blew up right into Mars and blew everything off of Mars,
right,
who's coming back to Mars putting geoglyphs on it?
Right. Well, the thing is that if the planet X that blew up causing the asteroid belt blew up, the theory from that perspective is that whoever knew that their planet was going to blow up, they had left, and what was left was their moon now became the Mars. That's a similar scenario that where they had come back to Mars to put these geoglyphs after the destruction. After the asteroid belt was created where this planet X blew up, it still supports our thesis that these geoglyphs were put on Mars after it was a dead planet.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Anything else?
Is the caller still there?
It's showing that he's there, but I'm not hearing him. Maybe he's muted. Are you muted? No, I think we lost him. All right.
Out there?
Yeah, he's gone. I don't know what happened to his line. Something must have killed him. But yeah. So what he's talking about then is that the asteroid belt actually is the actual planet, and that Mars would be the moon to that planet. But then
that's part of Tom Van Franlen's theory, is that the moon, or Mars, was a moon of this planet X that blew up.
Yeah, and thank you for the caller, by the way.
Right.
But then look at us. We've been to, our moon, and who knows what they've done up there besides a flag and whatever else.
Well, thanks. I appreciate you having me on here on your show. I know.
Oh.
Hello.
Oh, what did we do here? Oh, I see what happened.
Basically, the reason we were on here was to try to promote the paper that was just published in the Journal of Space Exploration, and let the listeners take a look at it. It's not something that we're trying to sell. The journal's free. You can go to the website there for the Journal of Space Exploration and download the PDF file of the our section of the journal and read it, and call in next time they have a show here with Michael and tell them what you think. As for myself and William Saunders, my co-author, and some of the other our colleagues, we are going to be presenting 2 papers coming up this year at the Space Technology and Applications International Forum, which is going to take place again in Albuquerque, New Mexico in April. And we've submitted 2 papers this year, one dealing with a profiled image, another geoglyphic formation on the surface of Mars that resembles a Viking lord, which originally was featured in our second book, The Martian Codex. At the time, we only had one image of the formation. We thought it was so interesting, we had it in our second book. A chapter was dedicated to this interesting formation. And subsequently, since the book was out in 2009, and since then we've had 3 or 4 more images that NASA has taken of this formation. So that's given us a diverse data set here to work on a science paper. So we have that we're going to be presenting at the Space Technology and Applications International Forum, along with a second paper which deals with it's not a pictographic formation, it's more of a geometric type of formation. It's a wedge in a dome structure, and we've been working on that. William Saunders his background is in geology, and then one of the other authors of the paper is Michael Dale, who's also a geologist, and another contributor to both papers is James Miller, who is basically an image analyst. He's been doing this stuff for 15 years. So that's what we have planned for the upcoming months.
All right, fantastic. And we do have another call that came in here. We've got 719 area code. You are on Late Night in the Midlands. First name and where you're calling from, please.
You know me, man. Hey, Mike. And hey, George. This is Gary, the Mad Marsh and the Mars Reveal.
Gary.
Hello, Gary.
How are you, Gary? Happy New Year, Gary.
How are you, George? You have a good holiday.
Yes, I did. I said Merry Christmas and Happy New Year there, Gary, to you and your family.
Oh, excellent. It's going to be, I appreciate that. It's been long and calming and needed to be actually had. And this year and next year, I hope and pray even to be better, especially from the positions we are all in now in this working time. And I got to say, very interesting, and it's good that, the scientific journals, also at SPSR, connection to them and addressing these issues beyond what we have known, like you mentioned earlier, George, starting out at Enterprise in '98. You remember they were really really conservative. And, and they have been, I think, bolstered along by your close connections and interactions with them. Like you said, I think on another show you were on, which we'll get in a second, but that you mentioned something important, that you helped open their eyes. And I found that impressive, beyond Dr. J, I mean. Like Dr. Horace Crater and a few of the others there, and Mr. Williamson and others. And, look where it's at. What do you feel has been the progression of the mainstream science? Because, again, you're mentioning these papers. Remember, this is policy-driven mainstream. And think about this, even to have the position of, never mind paratopia, but this find for a face. George, a face of Mars is being put in a scientific paper.
Yes, that's great. That's what I mean. This is a very exciting time. It's great that we're on late night in the Midlands here discussing this and getting the word out there. He's getting a lot of calls, a lot of reaction. That's
no dark missions here.
No. We're trying to get it all out in the open. And, like I said, we're not trying to sell a book with this paper. The paper can be downloaded and read for free. You just have to go to the Journal of Space Exploration. And actually, this current issue that's out, there's, I think, 8 or 9 different papers in this issue, and all of the authors are members of the Society for Planetary SETI Research, and they all deal with structures and artificial features on Mars. So this is an all-Mars issue. It's another thing I forgot to mention earlier when we were talking.
Oh, nice.
Yes, so this whole issue is the Mars issue that they've just put out. Dr. Brandenburg is on the board of this journal, so he was very instrumental in putting this all together. We've been working on this.
Is any of his articles pertaining to Cydonia, as well as the nuke situation, involved in this latest magazine?
Yes, in the journal, he has another paper that he's done with some new data about the apocalypse, the 2 explosions that went on Mars, where he's
right, the nuke situation, correct?
Yeah, exactly. So that paper is in there, but it's different than the one that was published in the other journal. He's added some newer information. I think he was on. Dr. Brandenburg was just on Coast to Coast with George Norrie talking about the new data, which supports his theory that these 2 nukes went off on Mars.
Wow, it's really interesting where they're willing to go now, isn't it? I mean, compared to when we first began. I mean, look how, George, we've come a long way. We've come a long way.
Yeah, the audience should know, Gary and I, we met on Enterprise Mission Discussion Board. We go back, over 20 years I've known Gary. So Gary's one of the original researchers in this field.
That's right.
Indeed, and George has supported my work and many of my finds, and we've collaborated on some finds, and there's many finds I know he's still dying to do more research on that I have found, and even vice versa, believe it or not. So, George, don't sell yourself short. You have some interesting finds I'm very interested in, as too. Now, I want to get back to the journal first before I make my comments so I can get off. There may be another caller, wink, wink, but I want to say this. You know whose article and whose work I'd really love to see in that journal also? Dr. Horace Crater's on the mounds. Because it's a foundation of what she was doing, and I was really looking into, because he's right, but if he expands his search, he sees they're all over the place. And they're not all just craters. You know what I'm saying? I mean, this is very pertinent because it falls in line to the when and how and why these structures are sitting as they do, and the placements thereof, and whatever people call them grids, I call them artscapes. George, you and I had many discussions on that, on what I believe I'm seeing there, and how we're getting them from NASA. It has been, going good, but still, I still believe the Mars we now know is covered, and we don't have to get into that. But look where they're willing to go today, even coast to coast, and accept the faces of Mars. Now,
Well,
this is one aspect. Was Mike, as you know, the face of the Mars, and what has been obviously I've become as the icon for pushing, not by my decision, but by force, it seems. And I have to force my way, pun intended, more ways than one, to try to bring this subject up about the faces of Mars. And lo and behold, you made history. But however, what is the history that's going to be allowed, and how much of it is going to actually be through the research to be allowed to be addressed? You see what I mean? In regards to the faces of Mars and or secret images, you had ample opportunity, and I was really praying that you would have brought that up to Mr. Hoagland that time. Instead, he was giving you the reach around, and I know you've seen that, George.
Yeah,
you've seen that, but you told me one step at a time. You told me one step at a time. I know this ain't really your fight, but however, it is because you're out there pushing the face of Mars. I know you do, and I'm respectfully, I'm not disrespectfully bringing this up to you, and I don't want the listeners, because George and I go way back, and both as artists, and and what we have seen, like the Pink Panther and many other finds. I mean, it's beyond real. But that's the whole bizarre thing, because look where we're at now compared to where we were at then. All the attacks back then, and look where we're at now, and look where I'm at now because of an investigation in the faces of Mars. Yet all the serious Mars researchers out there are not bringing it up to the ones that needs to come to, especially when they're running their own shows, pretending to be these leaders and beacons of the truth. George, no offense, but you got to understand, and I'm not the only one that notices this, it shows complicitness to the conspiracy and uncare, which some said that I should call you out on, which I know it's not true, because you and I speak also privately time to time, do we not? So it's not like it's on a show or just bypassing. We've known each other for years, and I know I've been out of the way for a while, and you know why. And now I've been out, and look what the situation is, and no one wants to bring it up to me unless you don't get to go on this show, and like you tried to control Mike here. And it's not just one individual, George. It's a whole network. Even Art Bell himself complicit. This is what I mean. What I mean by seriousness. They're like, well, George is disrespecting. I said, no. I think George might be waiting for the right time or moment, or he might not know how, because he doesn't want to seem disrespectful. Because the things that happen to me gives me the nuts to be able to say, heck with all that respect crap, and just get to the truth. But, you got your thing going on and where you are in your work. But one thing is needed to be said, George. The faces of Mars is a reality. If we're finding them on hillsides like that, like what you described there in your artist friend, I like that presentation, by the way. Myself, I find it a little reachy. But after you putting out the recent things on that, I could see more of where you're coming from and why, especially with the new data. Back then, we had one image. You brought that up. Now we have, 5 to 10? After 10 years? So it's getting better. And it's still there. And okay, there's still something there of a reason, a credibility to want to justify. But when we as investigators, George, are confronted with other things that demand investigation because it's our job, you have to ask as well. Regardless what happens, you look the better because you're investigating. You want the answers. And I also pleaded I needed your help years ago. Now, again, I'm not saying this in no disrespect. I just want people to know where the reality is, because this is in the archive and people are listening, as Mike knows well, and you do. And therefore, my voice is on the record now to help paint a clearer picture of what the reality is, the faces of Mars. It's not a joke. It's happening, and it's there, and it's being suppressed by those who want to charge you guys money, make money off all you guys, and offer you reach arounds to stay in their camp of how they want to put their spin on what the history was, is, and will be. This breaks them. This breaks that policy, and George, it puts you and Mike and others that want the truth in a greater light by not being afraid to open the mouth. And I say this again, out of all respect, George, you and I go way back, and, we went through some whoop-de-doos, but this is a whoop-de-doo that is not just about me. It's about you. It's about Keith Laney. It's about Mike. It's about the whole audience, because it's something that we all need to know. Yet, look where it's leading. This whole thing on the surface, like I was trying to say to Mike that night, remember, Mike, about Sideshow? Everything's happening for what? It's bringing us to the realization, the focus. All right, what's this all about? Oh, Faces of Mars. Well, where's those images? Okay, but no one's asking. They're looking to you. They're looking to me. They're looking to Morning Stars. They're looking to David Wilcox. They're looking to Project Scamelot. They're looking to Art Bell. And where are they taking it? But yet, you're in the journal. What's wrong with this picture? George, keep rocking. I mean, no disrespect. I love you, buddy. But take in mind where it's going to go this year. And also, the Martian Revelation cometh again. Good night, George. Keep rocking. I love you again. No disrespect, but think about it. Mike, you rock. You kick ass. You're my brother. Good night, my friend.
All right. Good night, Gary.
All right, Mike.
Thanks.
All right, Gary.
Yeah, thanks for the call. I wanted to give you a chance to answer, George. So, I mean, anything that you want to get out there, you know, Gary, he's some might take him as crazy sometimes, and I say he's crazy about the truth and about getting.
Well, yeah. One thing Gary's crazy about is the truth, and I knew exactly the references that he was making. I don't know if the listening audience was sure about where that was going.
Yeah, I think so, because he's been on the show several times, and so he's had many times. I've covered Gary's findings and stuff for since 2011, I think. No.
Yeah, I'd like to propose a show with Gary and I coming on talking about the faces that Gary discovered, because I think that. With me on the show with Gary and presenting it to the audience, kind of the way we did the images of the crown face, I think people would be very, very impressed about what he has found. And what is controversial about what he's found is it's surrounded in controversy, and all the roads lead back to Richard Hoaglands and what he was doing with this project. And I think that would make a great show.
I think it would too. I'm all for it, as a matter of fact. So I'll get with Gary and
talk to Gary and see if he'd be interested in doing a show together, talking about that topic. And I'm sure your audience would be very interested in it.
I'm positive that they would. I think that would be great. I'd actually look forward to something like that.
Because there's a lot more to what Gary has found that I have some insight to, that I've discussed with him privately, and I think bringing some of this stuff to light would really be an amazing show.
Gary says he's all for it. He said, let's do it. So,
he's already contacted you?
He's in the chat room. He's already.
All right.
So I'll get with Gary and get with you, and maybe put you both in an email with me, and then we could figure out a good date. I mean, I've even got more openings this month later or next month. So it's be up to you guys.
All right. Sounds great.
All right. Well, hey, George, thank you so much for being here tonight. I appreciate it, and keep up the great work, please.
Well, thanks for having me on again, and I'll look forward to listening to the show back to see how everything sounded.
All right, great. Well, thanks again.
All right. Have a good New Year.
You too, my friend. You too. All right. Bye-bye. All right, everybody. So there he goes, George Haas.
Aspect of the face, showing the humanoid on one side, a feline on the other. Actually, most of the newer images all are taken of the feline side, that type of angle coming in from the eastern side, getting the feline side of the face. There's just overwhelming evidence that this is a structure that has artwork on it that looks like a bifurcated face with a humanoid on one side and a feline on the other. So it's very interesting that they have all this supportive information, and the media and basically NASA would just hope that people would forget about this. But that's not the only face on Mars. There's facial geoglyphs in different areas of the planet, along with figurative things, and animals, and all kinds of geoglyphic features on the surface of Mars.
Yeah, I've seen so much, and I don't take everything that people put on the internet, as so. So I take it from people who I trust, like yourself and others, and that's the stuff I most interest myself in. And even that, I've seen so much. I mean, I've seen these. It looks like art that has been designed to be seen from the air. I mean, that's what it looks like. Some of this stuff.
Exactly, and there's a lot of things that you can, I'm sure anybody out there can Google, structures on Mars and find all kinds of people that have posted things. And a lot of it is just, projections, and there's really nothing there. It's over-enhancement of the NASA, images, which creates, pixels and all kinds of distortions. But what we try to do is, we use multiple images that NASA's taken of these certain structures. Like the face on Mars has, like I said, close to 30 images to look at. So you have a whole data set. And not only do we have these pictures, all of the images have ancillary data, which tells you, what time of day, the angle, how high the camera was. So you have all this science, to back your descriptions of what you're seeing, as opposed to, just arbitrarily posting things that, kind of look interesting. Looks like, this rock kind of looks like a monkey or looks like a iguana, that's fun. It's fun to do. I mean, we all can see rocks and things in our backyard that kind of look like, the old man in the cave or something and things like that. But we're trying to be more serious here and looking at the images that can be reproduced and not just the one-shot deals that a lot of these things are.
Right. So now, what is the crown face? The crown face, geolithic formation apparently found on Mars. Is this something different?
Yeah, this is unlike the face on Mars, which is a three-dimensional structure, kind of like, which looks like a large mesa. NASA's always saying, well, it's a butte or it's just a mesa, which is a big mound which has this facial features carved on it. The crown face is actually on the valley of a wall on Mars. It's not a flat feature. It's more of a low relief carving. This was actually found by a member of the Society for Planetary SETI Research, Greg Oram. He found this back in 2000. The original Mars Global Surveyor image was taken in 1999 and released in early 2000. And that's when Greg, going through the NASA photographs at the time, found this. And when he saw this in the strip, he notified some of his colleagues over at the Society for Planetary SETI Research, most importantly, Dr. Tom Van Franlin, who was actually at the time collecting data and other examples of geoglyphic formations on Mars. And he was so impressed with this, he used this in his, he did a press conference at the National Press Club in New York in 2001, which was mentioned in a lot of the newspapers, was on television. It was a very big event. And he actually, this was one of the prime images that he featured at that press conference.
Interesting. Now, what other, and I know there's been many, but could you tell me about some of the other unusual formations that have been found on Mars? Namely, a lot of these geoglyphic type formations. Tell me a little bit more about them and what's being found.
Well, I started doing this in 1998, 1996, early on when the Mars Global Surveyor was taking the newer pictures of the face on Mars, and they started sending back all these newer, higher resolution images of the surface. Because originally all we had to look at were the poor Viking images, which were taken, back in the 70s. So people were finding stuff all over the place. Actually, Bill and I, my co-author, who's a geologist up in Calgary, Canada, I had met him at on one of the discussion boards, actually, that was run by Richard Hoaglands on the Enterprise mission back in 1998. And when Bill and I met, we were finding all this stuff on the surface, structures and geoglyphs, and we actually had enough information to put together for our first book that we put out called the Cydonia Codex. And that book, our first book's just full of these formations. And members of the Society for Planetary Study Research have been quietly going through all of these images and finding all kinds of things. And that's what brings us to your show tonight, because of this crown face. We only had that one image from the year 2000, and it wasn't until the year 2010 that the Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter actually took two more pictures of this crown face formation, which actually led to us putting together the science paper, which we presented at the Space Technology and Applications International.
So, first off, how about a little background? What drove you into this whole Mars thing?
Well, like everybody else that was interested in Mars back in the 70s, I remember NASA sending up the two twin Viking landers that went up there, and they had the orbiters going around, and the two Viking landers that landed in the Utopia area of Mars. And it was an exciting time, and that's back in 1976, that summer, when they sent back some images, which was the country was going through its bicentennial. I don't know if any of the listeners remember out there, if they were around in the 1970s, the country was celebrating its bicentennial, and the Viking was actually going to land on Mars, celebrating our 200-year anniversary of the country. So it was an exciting time, and not only did we land on Mars, they sent back pictures that showed what appeared to be a face on Mars. And I remember the press conference they had on television stating that they had found a structure or a formation that looked like a face. And then it was a couple days later they had another press conference. Didn't get a lot of attention, that they had taken pictures, a couple hours later, and it showed it to be nothing but a pile of rocks, and there was really nothing there. It was just a trick of light and shadow, and it was all forgotten. But a lot of people still speculated that this was possibly a structure. So that's how I originally got interested and intrigued with the possibility of structures being on the surface of Mars.
Incredible. Now, what say you on that face? I've seen both sides of the fence who say no, it just looks like one, and others who say no, absolutely not. There's been many pictures taken. It is a face, and even pyramids that are supposed to be around it.
Right. Well, the face on Mars is probably the most photographed feature on the planet. NASA's probably taken close to 30 images that include the face on Mars. So, even though originally they said they had no interest in this feature, it was, anything that they were looking at had to be scientific features that they were looking at, geological features. But, when all's said and done, they've taken, like I said, close to 30 pictures of this. So it's something that they've been interested in, in their own right. So we do have a lot of pictures, and what the pictures do show is what NASA tries to project to the public is that, the more pictures they take, it proves that this is nothing but just a pile of rocks and there's nothing really there. But it's to the contrary. Actually, the more pictures they have taken actually confirms the facial features, the eye, the nose, the split bifurcation, that they're going to be able to study rocks. I mean, these are just average people that are finding these. And it seems so obvious. And you would think that, an organization like NASA that's driving around seeing an odd-looking rock in the distance, that they drive the rover over there and get a close-up picture of it. But they don't. But if they see a rock that is a rock, they'll be sure to drive that rover right up to it and put they have that little tester on there that'll grind the rock and sniff it and see what type of materials it's made of. They have interest in that, but they don't seem to have any interest in something else that may look like it's an artificial structure.
And I'd have to believe that whatever it is, it's not that they're not interested. I'd have to believe that they just want us to think that there's no
publicly,
interest.
Publicly they're not showing any interest.
Right.
But we don't know what they're doing behind the scenes.
Well, they've got to be doing jumping jacks behind the scenes with what they're finding. Again, at least I would think so. I'm guessing, and even Dr. John Brandenburg, who I've had on several times, he says that one of the problems is people are looking for green vegetation when they should probably be looking for red vegetation up there. And, that could be because of the different sun rays that come through, right?
Right. Well, from what I've seen, I haven't seen any signs of any plant life or anything alive up there. Mars appears to be a pretty dead planet, but there's debris from some civilization that was there in the distant past that's still laying on the surface. Mars is the kind of planet that, if you build the face on Mars, it'll sit there for a very long time because there's really no erosion going on at this time. So it'd be a perfect place to build things that would last, for a very, very long time. And the things that we're seeing, like I was saying with the rover, all this debris around, they seem to be things that have just been blown up and ripped apart and just fragments of things. But they deserve a close examination, and that's not what we're seeing, like I said, publicly. NASA and the media itself would rather, somebody find a rock that looks like an iguana and have that, be on, Huffington Post and all kinds of newspaper online articles. And they more poke fun at the discoverer than, looking at it serious. And something like this crown face formation that we have published in the Science Journal, I've gotten no attention so far from any of the newspapers.
That's just, I guess I shouldn't be surprised, and I'm really not. But you would think that something like that, they wouldn't, they wouldn't be able to pass up on it because you've got alternative medias, you've got independent medias, you've got all these others,
right,
that who are putting it out there. And so that only further makes them look like frauds when they don't pick up on it. And I can't imagine that they're afraid that, it might make them look ridiculous. I have to believe that they're...
Forum in Albuquerque, New Mexico last year. I think we were on your program talking about that. I think we were on with... we had presented the Queen Nefertiti face, and I think we were on talking about that also.
Yeah.
Last year. And so we presented the paper there, and then it was eventually submitted to the Journal of Space Exploration. So this science paper has been published in a peer-reviewed science journal, the Journal of Space Exploration, which just came out in the fall issue of the journal. And so we're pretty excited about it. I mean, this is a major geoglyphic formation that was accepted in the Science Journal, and hopefully yourself and some of the other stations and media will take notice of this.
Hey, that would be nice, and that's one of the questions I have, and I know it's kind of self-explanatory, but I like to ask anyhow, and that is, how are they getting away with this type of news not being major news?
Well, there's a lot of reasons, I think. The media, they don't want to report anything unless, NASA calls them on the phone and says, look what we found. They have NASA has press conferences constantly for the last 20 years stating that they found evidence that there used to be water on Mars. And then a year would go by and they have another press conference showing slides and images of Mars that show that there used to be water on Mars. And the media, they just play along. And they're at the stage where they're not going to go public with anything unless NASA gives them a phone call and says we're having a press conference. They're waiting for NASA to come out and say they found this stuff. And NASA's not interested in doing that, I don't think.
Well, no, it wouldn't appear that they are. And, that's,
right.
I mean, there's so much more they could be telling us. I'm sure that they're not. I mean, we've got people here on Earth who are just going through their images and finding all kinds of stuff. And I'm not saying that everything that people say is something is, but right. Some things are just indisputable. I mean, you look and you could. You'd almost bet the farm on it if you can go there and check it out. Especially
with the rover going around taking all these photographs of the surface features, right beyond the little rovers that are going around, all these landscape pictures that they're taking, these panoramic views. I mean, there's all kinds of interesting things laying around. And, it seems publicly that NASA just doesn't have any curiosity about looking at any of these so-called rocks that don't look like rocks. I mean, there's things that look like mechanical objects, things that have been blown up, It looks like a battlefield in some of these areas that the rover's driving around, and with all kinds of debris around of structures that have been blown up. Some of these rocks have carvings on the sides. It looks like parts of buildings, and also mechanical instruments sitting around. You can see a lot of this stuff on the internet that people have found. And they have no geological background.